All right, hello. I'm John Schuyler. As in the past, this is Circus of the Future, and I'm doing a video interview with someone I've worked with in the past. His name is Hayden Trenholm. And if you've read the intro blurb to this video, then you know that I've worked before with Hayden's press, which is Bundoran Press Publishing House, on an anthology called Strange Bedfellows, which was an anthology of politically oriented science fiction. My story in there was when this peace thing blows over, and I think I've said this a couple times, but I'll say it again. Working on that anthology was really one of the most organized and pleasurable experiences I've had in the world of publishing, which is saying something. And one of the things that was interesting about Strange Bedfellows was that it had been supported by a crowdfunding campaign to get it off the ground and published. And if it wasn't for that crowdfunding campaign, that anthology, which really has been a major contributor to my career as a writer, would not have happened. And I've just heard that Hayden is doing another crowdfunding campaign for another anthology, and this one is going to be called Second Contacts. So we're sitting down to talk about that right here today. Now, Hayden, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been writing science fiction for close on 25 years now. I actually started out as a playwright. Had a number of plays produced, was on CBC a little bit here in Canada, and but then I focused more on science fiction, and eventually had about 25 short stories, 4 novels, actually 1 literary novel. Won a few awards for my work, and I was published by Bundoran. My 3 novels and an anthology called Blood and Water, which was my first anthology. And then about a year and a half ago, the publisher approached me and asked me if I wanted to buy the press, and after much deliberation, I decided to go ahead, and the rest is history. One of the first projects I undertook was Strange Bedfellows. It was something I'd wanted to do for a while. And as you mentioned, I did an Indiegogo campaign, which was successful, obviously, and which allowed me to pay professional rates, which attracted a lot of really good writers, including yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that was a major attractor because a lot of people don't realize this, but when you're a writer, a lot of your own self-esteem and a lot of your reputation is dependent on what you get paid. And I think this is something that, I mean, I don't know about in your experience, but with my friends and family, when I talk about, oh yeah, I was published in an anthology that pays professional rates, they're like, well, why are you so worried about the money? And I'm like, well, it's not the money, it's that this is an indication of how serious the market is.
That's right, exactly. And I think that, you know, the great thing was it was an open submission process, so I wasn't going out looking for anchor writers or any of that kind of stuff, and I was really impressed with the quality of stories I got, the experience of the writers. As you know, we have 2 Nebula nominees in the anthology, which is certainly a nice bonus for me. I mean, it certainly made my self-esteem go up to know that people of that quality wanted to work with our press, and so I was very happy with that whole process.
And I think, I'm not sure, but there are also some Campbell-eligible writers in the anthology as well.
Yes, there are some people who are just in their early stage of their career. In fact, there were, I think, 3 writers for whom it was their second sale.
Right.
And first professional sale for all of those 3 writers. So that was significant. So it was a nice balanced mix of experience of countries. As you know, there were seven countries represented in the anthology. We had an interesting mix of genders, multiple genders, as I like to say.
More than 2, which was nice to see.
More than 2. Yeah. So that was good too.
Boogie Techash and I, the Hungarian writer, got to know each other through Strange Bedfellows, actually, and now we're pretty good friends, given that we both have progressive ideas about gender and are both Jewish and write about Judaism. So Strange Bedfellows was fantastic. But I don't want to get sidetracked into just talking about it because I really want to ask you about Second Contacts, which is the book you're working on right now. So what is Second Contacts?
Right, Second Contacts will be an anthology of short fiction, focusing. We always talk about first contact in science fiction. When we meet the aliens or the aliens meet us, but very, very few books or even movies deal with the idea of long-term contact between human and alien civilizations, and that's the kind of stories I want to focus on. And I think it gives a window in. Of course, it's going to be political. I'm always political, and the things I publish always have a political element. But it gives us a window into things like colonialism and post-colonialism, into cultural appropriation and assimilation, and synthesis as well. And so I'm looking for those kinds of stories. What happens 50 years after that initial contact, and how are both sides changed by it? So that's what we're going for, is those kinds of stories. There are a few things I guess we can refer to. There was a South African film, and the name escapes me right at the moment, but which really dealt with the idea of really apartheid for aliens. But I thought it was a good example.
Yeah, District 9 was a good one.
District 9.
What came to mind for me was specifically, I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was one of the Roddenberry ideas that his wife developed after his death, Earth Above and Beyond.
I did see that a few episodes of it, but not a lot. And of course, it was Alien Nation that was a movie and then a TV show for a while. But again, they're few and far behind, and I think tended to only focus on one element of the political question that would arise from contact with another technological species.
Yeah, and also actually, I'm getting some flashes of A Case of Conscience. Have you read that?
James Blish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, so in for our listeners, Case of Conscience is one of the first books to integrate strong, well-defined religious themes into a science fiction novel and win awards for it. In that novel, Planet is being investigated for whether or not Earth should expand its ties, and part of the investigation committee is a xenobiologist who also happens to be a Jesuit priest. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it as a read for pleasure, but it's certainly a book that's important for the history of science fiction. So if anyone wants to pick up a copy of that, go for it. You'll be reading something that I think laid the ground for both John Brunner's work as well as for Canticle for Leibowitz. Anyhow, Second Contact sounds fantastic because you're absolutely right. It's not an area that's explored. The consequences of cultural contacts between humans and aliens are not often found except in the novel form. And the only thing I can think of offhand are either films, novels, or then there's David Brin's Uplift books. But there really isn't that much. And it's great that Bundoran isn't the only one, but there's a press out there that's paying so much attention to the political and sociocultural side of this. I assume that comes somewhat from the fact that you're politically active in Canada, right?
I am. I've been active for most of my life. I sat on my first constituency executive when I was 14. In terms of politics, I ran for federal politics when I was 24, and again when I was 25. I didn't learn the first time. I've been very politically active for a long time. I currently work as a policy advisor to a Canadian senator, and in fact, I'm on the job right now up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, where he represents. So it
seems like we're having a little hang up there. Did we lose you, Hayden? Well, I'm sure that the internet in Yellowknife is not exactly great. given that he's probably on hotel Wi-Fi or something like that. I'm sure that we'll have him back briefly. In the meantime, I'll talk a little bit more about Second Contacts. So for me personally, I think one of the things about an anthology like Second Contacts is that it really invites people who are doing things that the mainstream isn't necessarily doing to move themselves up into the professional rung, which you don't get an opportunity to see nearly that much in the more traditional venues. So it's vital that in science fiction we have things like that, because if we don't have them, we don't see new writers coming up with new credits. And it's obviously not impossible without anthologies like this one, but it does happen. Even so, the fact that we have crowdfunding is just incredible for the purposes of getting new writers to market. If you'll excuse me briefly, I'm just going to message Hayden. Anyhow, for me personally, I had written a story for Strange Bedfellows, which was, as far as I could tell, very difficult to publish. It was a story called When This Peace Thing Blows Over, which is all about... We don't want that. I don't know why we're doing that. I'm sorry. There we go. That's better. I don't know if my video is coming through any longer, but anyhow, I'm back. It was about a military occupation of another planet by military composed almost entirely of women as officers, and I didn't really see much of a market for something like that when I went and looked at what the professional markets out there happen to be. And without Strange Bedfellows and the crowdfunding that it obtained, I'm not sure it ever would have gotten published. And at the end of the day, I think it's a great story. Not to mention that Hayden provided me with a lot of notes on my story. Not necessarily changes. He's not an overbearing editor. But he provided me with a lot of guidance that took me to a place where I became a better writer through the experience. That's him now. Yeah, there he is. He'll be back briefly. Shortly, rather. Anyhow, it was truly a wonderful experience, and when I heard that Second Contacts was being crowdfunded, I really realized that I wanted to get involved with helping him fund it further. You're back now? There you go.
I am back.
All right, so what I've just been telling our viewers is that, and we do have viewers, by the way, what I've just been telling our viewers is that the experience of working on Strange Bedfellows was very important for me as a writer because, A, you provided me a lot of feedback on the story, and B, it was an opportunity to move up a rung with a story that might not have made it into a more traditional professional paying market. I haven't really been keeping up with it, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Asimov's hasn't published a lot of lesbian military science fiction recently.
I would say that's accurate.
Yeah, I feel comfortable guessing on that. Anyhow, now that you're back, we were just talking about how you've been involved in politics in Canada, and I think that that provides a really important perspective on why you pick the anthology themes that you pick, which, if you're a writer and you're listening to this, you should really keep in mind, and when you submit stories to Bundoran Press, that this is the eye you're submitting to. But actually, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the press? I mean, we know that you acquired it recently, a few years ago, but how did Bundoran come to be?
Bundoran was the brainchild of two people out in British Columbia, Virginia O'Dine and Dominic McGuire. They were the original partners, and really just came at it because they weren't entirely satisfied with the kinds of things they were seeing published by other Canadian publishers at that time. There's a pretty strong science fiction fantasy community in BC, so they started the press in 2006, and it was sort of producing one or two books a year. I think one year they had three, but there was no distribution, so we didn't have American distribution and so on. So they'd published about I think 11 books when I took it over, and since then I've published 5 more, and I have 4 in the works. So I've been a bit more active. It's helped quite a bit to get American distribution, which we have through Diamond Books. So that really makes a big difference in terms of getting the work seen, getting it out there, getting it reviewed, and so on, getting attention paid to it. So that was the history, and my involvement came in a sort of a funny way. I had published some short stories in a magazine called Neowopsis, which is a little Canadian science fiction magazine. And the first book that Bundoran did was Best of Neowopsis. So they bought one of my stories as a reprint. And then they sent around a note saying they were looking for novels. And I had a novel that had, gone to a few publishers but hadn't sold. So I sent it to them, and they bought it. We did quite a bit of work on editing. Virginia helped me out quite a bit with that, and as a result, the book got published. It was nominated for an Aurora Award. It was never meant to be a part of a trilogy, but I call it my accidental trilogy. There were 2 more books afterwards, and that's and it sort of became an anchor for the press, and they still remain some of our better selling books, and all 3 of them were nominated for Aurora Awards. One was nominated, for a Sunburst. That one, Stealing Home, I had the pleasure that year of losing the Aurora to Robert J. Sawyer, and the Sunburst to Guy Gavriel Kay. So not bad company to lose to.
Yeah, it's hard to go up against Robert J. Sawyer and win.
That's true. That's true. I'll actually be seeing Robert in just a couple of days. We're both going to be guests at the Northwards Writers Festival here in Yellowknife, and so that'll be a fun reunion.
Oh, so this is basically a work trip for both jobs.
It is, yes, it is. I was able to come up, do my Senate work for the first half of the week, and then do the Writers Festival for the second half.
It's funny. I don't think that sci-fi fans realize frequently just how busy the people who make their entertainment are, because so many of us have a second job where we're also writing or communicating in some way.
That's right. Yes, I work full time for the Senator, and then I do the publishing, and still try to maintain some sort of writing career of my own. Working on some short stories and a mystery novel that I've been plugging away at. So.
Great.
Yeah, indeed, and I hardly know anyone who only has one job in the field of writing. I mean, we all have to support ourselves one way or the other. Even Robert Sawyer, moonlights as a futurist.
Yeah, and I also sort of position myself that way. I'm going to be doing science nonfiction communication once I finish my doctorate in a few months. Anyhow. I wanted to ask a little bit more about Second Contacts. So this is the second year that you've done a crowd-funded anthology. So I imagine, and just from seeing the reception, it seems that Strange Bedfellows did pretty well. and now you're doing another one. Is the goal to do one crowdfunded anthology each year, or?
I'm not sure that I'll do it every year because I think you can tire people out. If I get this one through, well, then I'll take a year off and come back maybe in 2 years to look at something like that. I really want to keep these anthologies paying professional rates. So we're actually, with the increase in the SIFWA rate, we're going up another cent a word at least to 6.5 cents a word. And if we get over our if our stretch goals are met, then we'll go to 7 cents a word, and be really competitive with just about every market there is. Once you get up into that range, you're actually at the low end of what Asimov and Analog are paying. So that's our ambition. That's
great. That's absolutely great. And I've seen what crowdfunding has done for the industry, and we've seen markets come into the space as professional paying markets that just wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't for crowdfunding. I think the big example is Cross Genres has really hit the scene with a big splash. So on that note, how do you feel about crowdfunding in general for the publishing industry?
I think it's a good way in for particularly for small presses or people who are trying to do something more specific, more of a niche. I mean, inevitably you're going to have the the reading rainbow kind of stories where LeVar Burton has raised $3.5 million in a couple of days. I'm not sure how I feel about it when people who have other access to money make use of these crowdsource systems. At some point, you have to question: is this a way of getting around venture capital markets,
right,
and which have all kinds of rules and regulations on them and all sorts of requirements. It's one thing to raise $10,000 for a book, or even $50,000 for an independent video, but when you start raising $2, $3, $4, $5 million, you begin to wonder whether or not that's the most appropriate way to do it. But
yeah,
hey, if people give their money, what can you say?
Yeah, and also not to mention the fact that Kickstarter is making like $300K off of it, so I don't think that they're going to be too complaining if they have these big projects. But at the end of the day, I think it creates an impression with some people that there's something that's too small for a Kickstarter or too small for another crowdfunding option. And I'm not sure personally I agree. I'm curious if you would agree that there's a project that's too small to be crowdfunded.
I don't think so. I've seen some really neat little projects, and particularly where you're talking about people who poets, for example, are a good example. I've seen a number of poetry Kickstarters, Indiegogo campaigns, usually for $1,000 or $1,200, and what people are really looking for is enough money to put together a chapbook and a mailing list and essentially distribute their books. And I think that's fine. I think that those kinds of projects are valuable. The reality, and the other thing I think about these, with our Indiegogo campaign, we're putting plenty of money into this, ourselves. Bundoran Press is not funding the entire anthology strictly through the Kickstarter. We didn't fund the entire Strange Bedfellows anthology. I mean, we covered the printing costs, part of the writing costs, all the art and design, publicity and so on. And I think that's important too. I do sometimes wonder about Kickstarters or Indiegogos where people aren't putting anything into the game themselves,
right,
except I mean, they may be putting their labor, but they're not saying, I want to do this, but I can't quite swing it, so I need a bit of help. I'm more inclined to support those kinds of Kickstarters myself than the ones where they're going for the whole thing themselves, or from the group source funding. So I think it's all fair. I think some platforms are probably going to do a better job at supporting different kinds of projects. For example, I've noticed that Clark's World is using Patreon, which is rather than having you give one lump of money, for a single project, you can actually subscribe and give them $1 a month or $5 a month over a 1 or 2 year period to give them a regular source of funds to maintain, in this case, a monthly website.
Yeah, I myself am very intrigued by Patreon because I've been trying to find ways to justify the amount of time I spend writing nonfiction for my blog. But in the end, I decided it's not time yet. I'd like to move, from my current 1,200 followers, 10,000 hits a month, up to like another order of magnitude before I tried that. But I think the Patreon model is very interesting, particularly for magazines like Clarkesworld. But I've seen it work for artists, especially who are working on ongoing projects.
And I think the interesting thing about it is, I'm often of the view that technology doesn't change things; it just makes things that were done before more viable. The idea of patrons of the arts, where people would subscribe specifically to maintain writers, goes back to the 19th century. That was not an uncommon thing in Victorian England for people to subscribe to, not just to a magazine or a theater, but to actual specific artists and support them to do their work. So maybe we're reinventing the Victorian age.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Many, well, we're reinventing it with modern social ideas.
Yeah.
I think there's always some good at some point in history, and I think when we look at most of the great classical music, it was done by that model. So there's no reason that we can't do the same great things today with a more modern attitude.
Well, more democratic, I don't think I'd want to go back to the situation where I had to rely on, Lord Black of Cross Harbor to support my artistic endeavors. For one thing, he wouldn't. We don't quite agree. But I think, having a more democratic process where people can actually gather around a specific set of ideas or artistic approaches that they want to support does provide, I think, a new alternative to the traditional government funded arts grants or corporate grants kind of thing. I think it's somewhat entrepreneurial. It's certainly much more democratic from the point of view of the creators.
Yeah, I'm glad it's no longer an oligarchy-based system too. Anyhow, I just want to mention again, so the anthology that Bundoran Press and Hayden are currently trying to fund is called Second Contacts. I will post the link to the Indiegogo to my blog, as well as to the comments section on this video, as well as to my mailing list when this goes out. And you should really check out the rest of the Bundoran Press catalog, particularly Strange Bedfellows, which is on my bookcase over there. Just take a look at the project, see if it's up your alley, and please do give it some support, just for the sake of supporting writers, if not for the sake of making a great book. So I think the latter is an even better reason. I want to thank you, Hayden, for taking the time to do this.
Well, thank you very much for hosting it.
No problem. This is, honestly, part of it is keeping my mailing list at the very least monthly. I try to make it weekly, but keeping it at the very least monthly is quite a challenge. When I set out, I said explicitly, I'm not going to make the mailing list about myself. I'm going to make it about the cool things people I know are doing. So.
Oh, great! I'm glad I could be part of that.
Yeah, no, it was great to have you. I'll let you get back to the many things you have to do out there in Yellowknife, and have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
Alrighty.